Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Sharp, licensed psychologist, group practice owner, and private practice coach. This episode is brought to you by PAR. Psychologists need assessment tools for a more diverse population these days. PAR is helping by making many of their Spanish print forms available online through PAR iConnect. Learn more at parinc.com/Spanish-language-products. Many of y'all know that I have been using therapy notes as our practice EHR for over 10 years now. I've looked at others and I just keep coming back to therapy notes because they do it all. If you're interested in an EHR for your practice, you can get 2 free months of therapy notes by going to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. Hey folks, welcome back to the Testing Psychologist. Glad to be here with you today, and I'm glad to be here with my guest, Dr. Lynette Abrams-Silva. She is a board-certified neuropsychologist who serves on the board of directors of the American Board of Clinical Neuropsychology. A native New Mexican, she is the director of clinical training for the University of New Mexico Hospital's postdoc fellowship program in neuropsychology. Her career has been focused on the intersection of providing quality care to resource-poor communities, excellent training for future neuropsychologists, and increased diversity in the field. And this last topic is what we are tackling here today during our interview. So as many of you know, we have a diversity problem in neuropsychology. We have a field of about 85% white neuropsychologists in a country that is only about 58% white. So we tackle this and try to dig in and figure out what might be happening here and how to change that. So we talk about things like why this is a problem in neuropsychology. We talk about the chicken or the egg issue of recruiting diverse trainees without having diverse staff to support them. We talk a little bit about Relevance 2050, the initiative to increase and address lack of diversity in neuropsychology. And we also talk about Lynette's didactic series, which has been running for many years and can be a fantastic resource for anyone who's training or trying to board or just trying to get better at being a neuropsychologist. So lots to enjoy from this episode. I really loved talking with Lynette. She's a very dynamic individual and a prolific educator. She's been doing this didactic series for years now. So lots to enjoy in this conversation. If you are in private practice and you'd like a little help or support, the new cohorts of Testing Psychologist Mastermind coaching groups are starting in July. Let's see, I think I have spots in the advanced group. So that's the group for bigger practice owners, 8, 10, 12 or more clinicians. And there may be a spot in the beginner group as well. If you're interested in that, you can go to thetestingpsychologist.com/consulting and schedule a pre-group call to see if it's a good fit. All right, let's jump to my conversation with Dr. Lynette Abrams-Silva. Lynette, hey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, likewise, yes. We have a mutual acquaintance, I suppose, or friend or colleague, and one of our psychologists used to be down there in your area and has spoken very highly of you. And I know you've done a lot of training in this field and you're an incredible educator. So I'm honored to have you here. Thanks for being here.
What a fantastic introduction. Thank you.
Well, it's only downhill from here, probably. So, no, I'm glad to have you and glad to have the opportunity to have a really important conversation, about, it started with your presentation on the AACN agenda, I think, on recruiting diverse trainees. And then I think it's grown a little bit from there, and we're going to be talking about diversity broadly in our field and many other things. So yeah, thanks for being here. But I'll start with the question that I start with most times, which is why this is important to you, of all the things that you could focus on and actually spend your time and energy on in our field. Why this?
That's a great question. I actually ponder this from time to time. How did I get here? Why can't I let this go, for example?
Mm,
And I guess it's the combination of, aside from, of course, my friends and family and pets, the things that I love the most in the world are neuropsychology and my community, and where those intersect. And my community, just so you know, is in New Mexico. Um, and my family has been here for 500 years at least. So we are very New Mexican. I very connected to my community, and we are often overlooked. We are a minority majority state with very few resources, and most people actually that I meet out in the world have said things to me like, I didn't know New Mexico was a state. I thought it was a territory. I didn't think people actually lived there.
okay.
So yeah, so we tend to get sort of forgotten about, and I have wanted so badly to bring the highest quality neuropsychological services to my community, and in doing so, I have hit diversity issues in our field at every turn. So it's really impossible to focus on serving my community without considering diversity issues. And then it's just, can open worms everywhere. Uh, there's so much to be done that I really will spend my entire career on these issues.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, it seems like it's driven by a highly personal experience as well. I mean, I think that's super powerful.
It
Can
is
motivate a lot of us.
actually driven from my own personal experience, stumbling my way into my career. And that's part of what I try to address is I started grad school to become a clinical psychologist without even knowing what neuropsychology was or that it was a thing I could do.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until that first class that was required for all of our graduate students in neuropsychology that I just fell in love with it. And I wonder how I think everybody has sort of a challenging time getting through training and education. It's not easy for anyone, but I wonder if I would have had a somewhat easier time if I had known earlier, this is neuropsychology, this is what I want to do, this is how I prepare to be good at this, I instead of sort of stumbling around in the dark, essentially.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I hope that we can dig into some of those things as we go along. I mean, that's an experience that I imagine or know a lot of folks are still having. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
And like you said, it's been a big motivator for you over the course of your career, right?
that it has.
Yes, yes. Well, as we get going, I want to maybe just lay some groundwork and do some language discussion, right? And how
Yes.
we might talk through some of these things. So, this is I feel like deja vu. This is the second time this week I'm sort of coming at a topic with a real humility and beginner's mind and preemptive apology around language. I did a interview earlier this week on gender affirming assessment and
Mhm.
stumbling through all sorts of things. And so I'll go ahead and throw that out there. But, I would love to talk a little bit about language as we get going and how you would kind of choose to address some of these things. If diversity is a word that you'd like to use, if there are other better words to use, and maybe we just start there.
I think in many ways, I'm exactly where you are in that I have spent my entire early career focused on these issues, and yet terminology changes,
Hmm.
and I I myself have difficulty keeping up with what we're calling things these days. And I know that diversity is such a blanket term, and APA very rightly has pointed out that diversity is more than just racial ethnic diversity or socioeconomic. It encompasses everything, including ability and gender and sex and all of these factors that pretty much go into the human experience. And I agree with that in terms of classifying what diversity is. But my focus really has been on racial ethnic diversity, particularly focused on the Hispanic population, mostly because that is my own background and it is the background of the majority of my community. So that has been my focus. When I say diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think I'm using the term possibly dated around 2016, 2017. So it
Hmm.
may be a little bit outdated. I think that it has grown to include, again, many more facets of diversity. But for me personally, I can't manage that many, I suppose, issues. And so I have to focus on the thing that's in front of me, and the thing that's in front of me happens to be racial ethnic diversity, specifically the Hispanic population.
That's fair. That's fair. That's reasonable. Okay. Well, language is important, as we know. Want to set that
And it's a
framework. Yeah.
living thing that seems to change faster than I can keep up with it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, maybe we both agree to just do our best, through this conversation.
I think that that's exactly what is the best way to approach things. And, what you said about approaching with a beginner's mind, I've spent a decade on this and I still have a beginner's mind. So we're sort of in the same place.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Good place to start from.
Yes.
So, to actually get into the discussion, I might open it with a similar question. We talked about why this is important to you personally. I think there's probably some overlap here, but I'd love to hear from you why this is important for our field, to even be addressing this material.
Yes. I'm going to steal from AACN and the Relevance Project, which was created because the US population in particular is rapidly diversifying, and we as a field run the risk of being irrelevant at that tipping point where we become a minority majority country. And in fact, there are a lot of limitations already that we have faced, particularly cross-cultural neuropsychology, cross-language neuropsychology in particular. We don't have measures for every culture and every language. And the idea that we can just translate it linguistically, first of all, is terrifying to me because you miss a lot of the things you can't necessarily detect just from language. You miss the culture. What do certain cultures? What kinds of things are they exposed to? And are we measuring the same thing? What is our construct validity across cultures? So there's that we already are facing, and this stands to get much worse in the future when we have sort of, I guess, our measures have sort of aged out and do not apply, and our normative data does not apply to the U.S. population. So, in order to, maintain relevance, because I do believe that neuropsychology has more to offer than anyone realizes, uh, we do have to adapt and keep up with the populations that we serve, and that there are many fronts to this particular issue where we do need better normative data, but that's not going to be enough. We also need to increase our competence with the limited tools that we have, because even if we did have, say, the perfect normative data, how long will that last? Five
Sure.
years, seven, before we then again have to make better normative data and better updated measures. And we do need to increase representation within the field to make these changes. It really is a lot like the tower test. And I'm just moving discs here, trying to
Mm,
get some change to happen.
right, right. What's the correct order? How do we solve and plan for this? It's complex. It's
It
complex.
is.
This is a question you may not know the answer to, but I wonder, so just knowing the life cycle and development cycle for a lot of our major measures? Have you heard of anything from the major test publishing companies as far as preparing for some of these shifts over the next, I mean, 20 years is going to go by really fast. And especially when we're talking about new versions of the WACE or whatever, that goes by really fast. And I haven't necessarily heard of any of those conversations, but you're closer to this than I am.
There is a push from within APA to encourage development of measures and the updating of normative data. And again, I mean, these things take time. There are committees, there are test companies. There is a lot of work that goes into creating new normative data and developing new measures. And we can't wait for that. So not only do we have, time that's going quickly, as you said, 20 years can go by in a blink, but also we can't wait for the perfect measures, even if they were possible. We still have patients we have to see tomorrow, and how do we do that? And for me, that always comes back to the competence that we have with imperfect tools, and how important it is to promote the highest level of competence, particularly when doing cross-cultural work.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of framing our conversation a little bit here as we're going along. And it's like there's these two prongs, there's almost I don't know if you call it the client facing side, but that's kind of what we're getting into now is the measures and how do we actually do good work with the folks who are, at least at this point, not majority, right? And
Right.
then there's the what's the other side? What would I call it? The recruitment side, or our practitioner side, and how we support and develop more diverse trainees and neuropsychologists, right? So
I think we need to address both at the same time.
yeah, yeah.
Which is a tall order.
Of course, of course. Well, maybe we talk about the client-facing side first. We're kind of dipping into that already, and you've made a couple comments around we can't wait, right? We can't wait for the perfect measure, if that was ever even a thing that we could have. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what does that look like right now? What does that actually look like?
Well, I can give you sort of an example from my own experience, which is, again, in New Mexico. I think a lot of places in the United States are suffering from the lack of Spanish bilingual neuropsychologists.
100%.
Increasingly, yeah. So it's not even just a New Mexico problem, but it is very pronounced in my state. And I do not speak Spanish. I am part of that generation. I'm going to give away my age here. In the 80s, there were the 80s, which in my mind are perpetually 20 years ago. To your point of 20
I'm
years
right
going
with you on
quickly.
that. Yeah, you're among friends here. Yeah.
But in the 80s, there were these studies that suggested that bilingual children did poorer in school. And so my mother, being an educator, made that decision not to teach me Spanish. It was my father's first language.
Mm,
I have little excuse for not learning it later, but when I was a child, I did not grow up bilingual by design. My parents wanted me to be successful in America. And they thought that that meant monolingual English speaking to get through school. And I think that that's not just a footnote in this conversation. A lot of what is contained within that story about my background is what drives my work today. Because I think about, had I been bilingual, I think actually my difficulties getting through to this point in my career might have been exacerbated, because everything that contributes to your growing up Spanish bilingual contributes to the distance you have to travel to get to where I am today. I feel very fortunate, but it does feel like it was a choice, even though we know now, newer research, it is not true that bilingual children do poorer in school. Um, so we know that, but there are all these socioeconomic factors and social capital and social mobility that still go into that. So I am not bilingual, and that has, especially in the last few years, been sort of a problem in my community because
Mm,
I shouldn't be the first choice to see Spanish speaking patients, but there is almost no one else available. So my goal in the last few years has been to try to bring trainees who are Spanish bilingual into my state, to lure them to New Mexico, and even temporarily have them work under my supervision so that I can see those patients. I have worked, I was very fortunate on fellowship to be able to train with the use of interpreters. So I do have that background in my training and education, and I can do Spanish evaluations, and they are easier than, say, Polish, which I also had to do when I was on fellowship,
oh,
because
goodness.
I do understand. I understand Spanish perfectly well. I just, when I speak it, I sound like a 6-year-old.
Okay.
So I'm not really able to be a neuropsychologist who speaks Spanish. I do need someone who is fluent. So in the past 4 years, I've had two trainees who have, spent some time working with me. And that is how I've tried to address some of these issues and barriers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that gets to the question of how do you find these trainees and how do you get them to New Mexico or anywhere else that might need this? I mean, this seems like a ubiquitous problem. We say the same thing in Colorado here, which is, um, there's a huge Latino population in Colorado, right? And there are, I mean, I think there is one Spanish speaking neuropsychologist here in our town of 200,000. And even that person, only works birth to five. And so it's, it's a huge problem, and I hear this
It
all over.
is. It is. This is one of the things that I'm working really hard to try to overcome. So I lurk. That's the first thing that I do. I lurk on listservs, just
Mm,
waiting for
hmm.
someone to post something saying, "Is there training available for Spanish bilingual person at any level?" So lurking has its disadvantages.
Okay.
So the
Yes.
student that we had over the summer was actually a Concordia student, and Concordia is in Canada. So you're probably thinking, why would someone from Canada want to come to New Mexico for the summer
Sure.
for training? And it turns out actually Canada has had its own struggles with training issues, and whatever was going on up there, they couldn't provide training last summer for practicum students. And there was a student who posted on the HNS, the Hispanic Neuropsychological Society listserv, asking for options for training in a Spanish bilingual population. And I responded in 3 seconds. And I sold New Mexico as hard as I could. I think that's New Mexico and neuropsychology have this in common. I don't think we've been very good at PR. We
Hmm.
haven't really sold ourselves, I think, as well as we could have. And this is definitely true for New Mexico because it's a beautiful place with a low cost of living.
Hmm.
And so I did. I sold the idea to this student who came for the summer, and he became, part of our little neuropsych family, and he did great. And we were able to see Spanish speaking patients. Not only Spanish speaking patients, that's another issue entirely, which is when you get a Spanish speaking trainee, they do tend to be pigeonholed and they become the Spanish speaking neuropsychologist, and that's all they do. And it's true, you could do nothing but Spanish evaluations, but I don't find that that's valuable for training. So we did cap the percentage of Spanish evaluations for our trainees to make sure that they get a broad experience.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. Yes, I mean, it seems like a big picture problem, right? I mean, again, you're the the expert in this area. I just wonder, it seems very chicken or egg to me, right? Because, uh, well, the field of neuropsychology is pretty white in general. I think we know this, right?
We
And
do.
so then how do you recruit non-white neuropsychology students without mentors or advisors or professionals to look up to or whatever? But then how do you get non-white neuropsychologists without the trainees who go through the program? I'm just laying it out. I know there are no answers, but this seems like a complex problem.
If you keep going, just keep doing that, what you just did for about 8 years, then you'll be where I'm at today. This is
Okay,
the stuff.
great. Yeah.
This is the stuff that wakes me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, thinking how do I? It's kind of like trying to join an already started game of double dutch. Just trying to jump in and okay, what do I do? How do I fix this? How can I
Mhm.
contribute? And that's my second story about recruiting someone from somewhere else to New Mexico is my fellow. So I have an institution job and I also work in private practice, and I do enjoy the freedom that private practice allows. And a friend of mine had come to me for advice, saying she was mentoring an intern who could not get a fellowship on mainland US. This was someone from Puerto Rico. And she wanted to know what resources were there, how could she help him? And it was a story that is very familiar and frustrating, which is, the training in Puerto Rico is just a little bit different than on mainland US. And he wasn't able to break in to these fellowship programs because of that. But being Spanish bilingual, there were plenty of people who were offering him unpaid externships.
Mhm.
And it just enraged me. And so when I was talking to my friend, I said, there's no reason I can't have a fellowship, which again, I don't know where I get these ideas about what I can and cannot do. But I essentially the next day went to the practice owner and said, we're going to make a fellowship. I'm going to run it. And we have someone that I want to try to recruit. And I have to give so much credit to the practice owner, whose name is Rex Young, and he said okay, and allowed me to run with this idea. So I met with the then intern. We recruited him to come to New Mexico. I think it helped that everything I know about Puerto Rico, we have a lot in common. New Mexico and Puerto Rico actually are very similar. And
Mm,
so we got him for 2 years, and it was amazing and fantastic. And I was not easy on him. I trained the heck out of him, and he accepted his first job at Barrow, which
that's
for our first fellow, I feel we're very very proud of that.
absolutely.
But it was like jumping into an already started game of double dutch. It was saying, here's someone that could really contribute to our field and our community in particular. How can I invest in this person to make sure that he gets what he needs out of training, and we can also help serve the community at the same time? It just seemed like everyone would win.
Mhm.
So yes, I feel like some of it is having that freedom to be able to create something for someone. And I know that not everybody has that, especially in institution jobs, and when you're part of the match, there are a lot more sort of uniform standards. So this was actually a blessing to be able to do that.
Right, right. So do you think that private practices have the leverage, like more leverage, and maybe like heavier, more of a heavier influence in this whole process? Let's take a break to hear from a featured partner. Y'all know that I love therapy notes, but I am not the only one. They have a 4.9 out of 5-star rating on trustpilot.com and Google, which makes them the #1 rated electronic health record system available for mental health folks today. They make billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth all incredibly easy. They also offer custom forms that you can send through the portal. For all the prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly offering e-prescribe as well. And maybe the most important thing for me is that they have live telephone support 7 days a week, so you can actually talk to a real person in a timely manner. If you're trying to switch from another EHR, the transition is incredibly easy. They'll import your demographic data free of charge, so you can get going right away. So if you're curious, or you want to switch, or you need a new EHR, try Therapy Notes for 2 months, absolutely free. You can go to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. Again, totally free, no strings attached. Check it out and see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes. As psychologists, we know that the more people we can reach, the more we can help. To do this, we need assessment tools that allow us to assist a more diverse population. PAR is helping by making some of their most popular Spanish language tests available online through PAR iConnect, giving you more flexibility in serving your clients. Learn more at parinc.com/Spanish-language-products. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
I think it's a double-edged sword. And what you sort of said about, we do know that neuropsychology is overwhelmingly Caucasian. Our last salary survey, which I think was in 2020, suggested something like 85% white. And we're not really it does represent an improvement. I do have to say that, but we're not really keeping up with the rate of diversification in psychology overall, much less the US population. And so what my fellow encountered, I think, is part of the problem, where we're saying, sure, we can use your services, but we're going to give you an unpaid externship. I think we really need to start to value these qualities. So it wasn't just, oh, he's Spanish bilingual, but he did have those metrics that sort of constitute distance traveled. And that actually predicted, in retrospect, right? You can predict something in retrospect, predicted his success. So these qualities that contribute to the whole theory of distance traveled that people have also predict success. We just don't look at them because they're harder to measure. And he had perseverance, and he had intellectual humility, all of these things. And he did end up being a successful outcome. So I think, yes, private practice I think it would be easier to facilitate these kinds of training programs, but we do have to be careful. We do have to make sure that supervisors are competent and good supervisors and are willing to invest. So the other problem is we can't just open the doors and say, yes, we're going to admit everyone. We do have to take into consideration the system. The system was not built for marginalized populations, and it is very hard for us to navigate these systems. So there needs to be some support.
Yes.
I really could have benefited from that as a student in particular. I felt very lost. The academic system is very confusing, and I was not prepared for that. I thought graduate school was going to be like school.
Sure.
That's
a reasonable assumption.
Right. And it's not at all. There's a whole, what they call that invisible curriculum.
Yes.
So, trying to navigate that, there needs to be mentorship. There needs to be an infrastructure to support marginalized students and trainees. So yes, I think there's a lot of capability in private practice. And I think it would be great. I'm already volunteering myself for more work, which is my Achilles heel. But it would be great if private practice is interested in this, had like a group that could discuss and consult, because I find consulting is one of the most important things you can do when doing something new like this. And it sounds like really obvious, but I think we don't emphasize consultation enough, really. I feel like I consult with my pediatric colleagues all the time. Probably they're to the point where they're irritated with me from asking questions, but we can learn so many things from each other. And I feel like that would be a great model to have a group of private practice fellowship supervisors who consulted with each other.
I agree. I agree. I think there's a lot of vulnerability in that, and people maybe are feeling protected or protective or defensive or something. And, it's hard to reach out and
It is.
admit that we need help. But every time it happens, it is super helpful, and that connection goes a long way.
It does.
Especially when we're doing something new-ish like this, where there's no real playbook. And
Absolutely. I mean, especially when it's just a little bit different. So
mm-hmm.
one example I have is traumatic brain injury in the Navajo population.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like neuropsychologists, we really have to know about traumatic brain injury, and we get education and training, and hopefully we're all really solid on what it looks like on testing, unless you're Navajo, and not a lot of people know that. So my dream of the future is that someone somewhere has a Navajo patient and has that aha moment of, I should probably talk to someone about this, and not assume that I know exactly what this is going to look like on testing. Because, and here's the kicker, block design in particular from the waist has been shown to be inflated in the Navajo population. They call that the Navajo effect. So if you're looking to block design to confirm, like, yes, this is TBI, you're going to be disappointed and you could miss it. So, I feel like just having that moment's thought of, I think I should reach out to someone. And of course, you're going to think about Ted Judd, because that's who we all think about when we think about cross-cultural neuropsychology. And then this has happened. Someone has reached out to Ted Judd, who reached out to me because I have a lot of experience with the Navajo population. So it sometimes does really work. I just wish it was more widespread.
Yeah. I hear you. I want to go back to something that you talked about, the system, right? And
Yes.
there's just a piece of that I feel like I can identify with being, I was the first person in my family to go to grad school and maybe the second to go to college. But, there was no script. There was no script. And even for me, and I'm, like lots of privilege, right? Like there, it's all right here. Like, lots of privilege. And that was still very, very challenging. And I had a lot of difficulty in grad school, and just thinking about how much, having a parent or a mentor or, anyone who could have helped pave the way. And so I'm curious for you, and having, talked to folks, thought about this, that's a big thing to work with, a big thing to change, like how does one even start to change a system like that? Even if we're just talking about like grad school, right? And
Yes.
mentoring folks through that process.
I think this was my experiment in my current position. I was hired by my old grad program to be the director of the student training clinic.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I am the only local Hispanic representation within all of the psychology department at this level at UNM in New Mexico, which is unusual, and it's sad. I do believe that more representation from the local Hispanic population would make a difference, which is part of why I pursued this position. And I did that because I wanted to be the Latina supervisor that I would have benefited from having as a student. Not because I'm any better at navigating the system now than I was then, because I still can't. I'm still baffled by the way it's set up, and I still don't understand half of the bureaucracy. But because just having someone who has reached a particular level in their career, who looks like you and who has your same background and who can understand your profound confusion about everything is so valuable. And I think what needs to happen there is infrastructure to support that particular faculty member or staff member to be that person. So there does have to be a lot of work that I think, I don't want to say people don't want to do, but I'm not sure they know where to start in addressing these problems. I mean, you could go round and round in your head thinking of where to jump in on this problem and drive yourself crazy. So increasing representation is important, but we do have to have the infrastructure for anyone who we invite into the system that frankly was not made for them. You know, this system was not made for me. It was actually kind of made to keep marginalized people out. And no matter how much we try to adjust, we have to accept that the system was built from a very specific worldview, and we can't change that.
Yes.
Bleak, I know.
Yeah, I'm just sitting with that. I'm just sitting with that. But it's true. It's the reality. Yeah. Yeah. For folks who may not be as plugged in or aware of some of these factors, I mean, when you say that our grad school system or maybe the educational, post-secondary system is sort of geared toward keeping marginalized people out, can you say more about what you mean by that, just to make it super explicit?
Yes. So to get into grad school in particular, there are a number of things that we use as metrics for admissions. And I think people are moving away. I know of a lot of programs that have moved away from the GRE, but for 50 years, we relied on GRE scores and transcripts with really good grades and possibly a research background, which often required that you volunteer in a lab for no pay and do research under a particular mentor. And in order to do that, you had to know that that's what you were supposed to do. So
Right.
starting very early, there are barriers to achieving even admission. And I think some of that has started to change, but we do still rely on we rely on factors that are tied to socioeconomic status and social capital. And marginalized people tend not to have a lot of either.
Right. Right. Yeah, that in itself is huge. It goes back to that script idea, like if you don't have the script for preparing for grad school, which starts really early.
Really early. In my wildest dreams, I would be giving talks about neuropsychology to fifth graders.
I like that.
Not that kids, I'm an adult person, so kids might not be my thing. Maybe I'll get one of my pediatric neuropsychologist friends to do it. But us, I think reaching out earlier to communities like mine. And again, I think we are, as a field, very concerned. We do, for the most part, want to diversify. And I have heard colleagues of mine in anguish about how do we do it? How do we reach these populations? And I think that a lot of mentorship and outreach at a younger age is part of it. I think both of those would be key.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any cues to be taken from other fields? I mean, I have to imagine that this is a similar problem in medicine or engineering or other advanced degree field law. I don't know. I would have to imagine that there are other disciplines who are trying to tackle the same problem. Is there anything out there that can help us?
Absolutely. I like to think of medicine as sort of our cousin because we do work together. We're not exactly the same, but we have a similar model. And medicine, as far back as 2015, has been looking at admissions a little bit differently. There are many programs that have moved to like a holistic recruitment model. And the Association of American Medical Colleges is promoting this, which is to look at the whole background of the person for those factors that I was talking about that do also predict success. It is easy to say, okay, so someone who has really high SAT scores is going to be more successful in higher education because all of these are coming from the same worldview. So of course they're going to predict each other. But what else predicts success? And can we use some of that? And the holistic recruitment model is meant to do that, to look at how far someone had to travel from their socioeconomic status of origin to even get to the point where they're applying for your program.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know about this. So the way that it happened for me was I had created the fellowship in that way that I described, where I just decided one day that we were going to have a fellowship and I would figure it out. And after I did, I found out from my colleague and friend, Stephanie Towns, that there really was already a model called holistic recruitment that focuses on everything I was talking about. So I was really pleased to find that yes, there are other disciplines that are interested in changing how we look at admissions, and there already is a bit of research and material out there that describes it. So that was very helpful to find that I wasn't just hitting on something that had no name, because that is very frustrating when you're trying to describe something and it has no name and people look at you like you're crazy. So at least there was already something out there.
Right. Yes. And I would love to, I'm going to go check that out, try to learn a little bit more about it. But I mean, just from what you know about holistic recruitment, is there, I'm a data person, right? So is this kind of like a rubric based strategy? Is there, does it get that granular, or is it more a qualitative approach, I suppose, to finding and evaluating candidates?
Both. I would say it can be quantitative or qualitative. It depends on how much you weight certain factors. So let's say, first generation higher education. You can weight that however you like. Spanish bilingual or any bilingual, or born on the mainland US or not. You can weight these factors however is consistent with what goal you're trying to achieve. And I think people do it differently. There are some grad programs in psychology that are doing this now. And I think it's kind of a struggle because we are used to, I mean, we're data people too. Right? So we want that number that is going to predict success. But if you take into consideration these factors, and as you look at more of them and weight certain factors more than others, or equal to others, then it can be more quantitative.
Great. Yeah. You mentioned Relevance 2050, I think back at the beginning of our discussion, right? And
Yes.
I wanted to highlight that a bit. I mean, for folks who may not be aware of that, can you give just a brief kind of overview of Relevance 2050? And, because I see that as sort of the, I don't know, macro sort of organizational, most coherent effort. Feel free to disagree with any of that, but within neuropsychology, so I'd be curious what you have to say about that.
I think that's right. I'd never actually seen a push like this from within the field to diversify and to approach it from different perspectives, meaning, not just focused on let's get perfect normative data. I think that Relevance 2050 actually talks about a lot of what I've talked about here today, which is these multiple faceted areas that have to be addressed at the same time, which is why it's an initiative, right? So it needs an initiative in order to have multiple people working on multiple facets of a very difficult problem. And the goal is to increase diversity in the field, in AACN, and in leadership of neuropsychology. And people are working on it, which is great. And I'm really grateful that it's out there, that we actually have some direction from, I guess I'm going to call it the field, and that this has become a value within neuropsychology because it is very needed. And, particularly for communities like mine, we have very few resources as it is. And so we do need more of us in the field.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I'll make sure to put some info in the show notes for people who want to go learn a little bit more. I know there's a lot of information out there. Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yes. So we've been, I think, talking primarily about macro strategies for recruiting diverse trainees and changes within the systems and whatnot. I wonder if we could move to micro strategies a little bit more, and really like detailed sort of like I'm not sure if it's one-to-one or even just small group kind of intervention that come to mind for you in this whole process.
Of how to save the world.
Yes. Yes. How
Yes.
do we do that one person at a
One
time,
person
Lynette?
at a time.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I think it depends on your position, everyone out there, your position in your organization, and what you can do. What do you have the most control over within your organization? At a minimum, I think it's very valuable to volunteer your time, all of the time that you don't have, to mentor students and trainees who are headed in this trajectory. Um, Even if you're not of that same background, there are a lot of mentorship programs that have popped up through our various organizations. And so some of them are structured, some of them might not be, but just volunteering to share your knowledge and experience and your ability to navigate a system with those who you see struggling to get through it. I think each one of us can do that once, right? At least once.
Yeah. Yeah. That's reasonable.
Yeah, I think that mentorship is one of the biggest things that we can do, just again to create that infrastructure that supports people from marginalized backgrounds getting through this process. I think we can model really good consultation behavior and talk more with each other. The other thing that wakes me up at 2:00 in the morning is, what is our community nationwide going to look like in 5 years or 10 years? I feel like we're becoming more divided and more isolated, and I would do anything, frankly, to reverse that process by creating connections with each other. I do want to call up Ted Judd and ask his opinion about a Peruvian patient. And, I want people to call me up and ask about people from New Mexico or the Navajo population. And just the more conversation we can have with each other, I think the better that's going to be for each of us and for what we have to offer our trainees.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Yeah. I think, a big question in all of this is with so many of these related topics is, are there particular things that I would say majority culture folks can do, to kind of do more lifting in this whole, this whole dynamic, so that it's not solely pinned on marginalized folks.
I have to say, I was trained almost entirely by white men. And they were wonderful. I adore them, and they all treated me with respect, almost like a little sister, really. I feel like they've been very invested in me, and I'm so grateful and so lucky. And I know that that's not necessarily the norm. So I really want to encourage people who have sort of any level of privilege, honestly, to invest in people who have less. And that doesn't just mean doing things the way that you do them for everyone, really looking at the strengths and weaknesses of a particular person and really being a true mentor to that person. I've been so lucky to have just some of the greatest mentors ever. And I would not be the neuropsychologist I am today without them. And so, finding that area where you can contribute the most. And then I know that there's a lot of nerves about this. Like, I'm going to say something wrong. I'm going to be offensive. I'm going to use a wrong term, and it's going to, really upset this person who is from a different background from me and who I'm trying to like help and mentor. But that too is consultation worthy. Reaching out to those of us who are from marginalized backgrounds, who are your colleagues, and asking us, how do I handle this particular situation with this Latina student, for example? I would love to get those questions. I would love to have more conversations like this, where I can point out you can't necessarily do things exactly the same as you would for the majority of your trainees, but investing in trainee success and seeking consultation about that is a fantastic thing to do.
I appreciate the permission to do that. Yes.
Please. I mean, I feel like I'm also volunteering myself for more work. Probably like 3 times already in this conversation, but absolutely happy to discuss any of these issues with others who struggle with this, because I have seen my colleagues really struggle with how do I help contribute to the solution to these problems, and doing innovative things. I'm pitching an outreach program, I suppose I'll call it, with didactics that I would like to get some volunteers for, and have free online didactics through my new position that I'm about to start next month. And we're sort of in talks about that, and being open to ideas like that. If we have virtual free neuropsych didactics that can reach rural areas, and again, with all the time that we do not have, just engaging in that kind of activity, I think really helps us on a lot of levels. It reaches people who don't have the resources readily available, and it makes us who are sort of in the field less scary. We're not intimidating. We're all just a bunch of nerds, and really builds a community better, I think. So, initiatives like that, I would encourage people to do when they have the means.
Absolutely. You mentioned your didactic program. I think that's a great segue to talk more about your didactic program. What does
Yeah.
that look like? Yeah.
Yes. So, if you took away everything from my training and said you only have one thing that's going to make you a neuropsychologist, what's it going to be? I would pick fact finding. I love fact finding. I think it is like a parlor trick to work through right? To work through a case in real time. And doing that on a weekly basis accomplishes a lot. I mean, you get case conceptualization, you get functional neuroanatomy, you get psychometrics, you get so much out of just going over case after case after case. And you get prepared for the board exam, because there is a fact-finding portion in the board exam. And I found once I left Chicago, where I trained, this is actually not standard in all training programs. At least it wasn't at the time. And I think it's still, there are places where they don't necessarily have the resources to do fact finding weekly. And that was disturbing to me. I wanted to provide that for people who could benefit from it. I also got feedback from a lot of, particularly my Hispanic counterparts everywhere in the US, that fact finding was, they found it unpleasant. And that just broke my heart, because I love it so much and you get so much out of it. But, the Socratic method isn't for everyone. And that also comes from a very specific worldview and can feel very hostile, especially if you are the only person of color in the room
Sure.
and the person, doing the fact finding is privileged or, part of the majority or, maybe really famous in the field and you feel intimidated. And
Hmm.
so I thought I could do this. I could be a fact finder person and host online didactic. So in 2017, I started online fact finding before Zoom was cool. I did it over Zoom. And we started with something like 4 students, and word of mouth spread. And so far since 2017, I've had more than 150 people come through. There's no requirement, so people can sometimes just come for one if they want to. But I do have a registration on the Zoom, and so I can count. More than 150 people have at least come once, and that has been, I mean, I did it when I had COVID, which might have set a bad example for people. I looked terrible and people were worried about me, but I couldn't cancel fact finding. And it just warms my heart when people say that they value it and it's their favorite time of the week, or that it helped them pass the board exam. I feel like it's my own little, not necessarily podcast where I can do fact finding with people who really want to learn. And I'm hoping to actually transition that now that I am transitioning jobs and broaden and partner with an organization to get more volunteers, because it has been a one-woman show pretty much for the past, oh gosh, 7 years, I
7 years.
So
Yeah.
people have got to be tired of hearing from me by now. And I would like more people to get involved. And again, I think that solves a lot of problems. It gives people access to, those of us who maybe have a big name somewhere, that it offers opportunities to build connections with people that we wouldn't maybe otherwise even meet. So I'm hoping that I get this off the ground. We're hoping it will be hosted by Project Echo, which the values of Project Echo are to reach out to. It started with physicians in rural areas who don't have a lot of colleagues to consult with, and now hopefully we can be part of that. I think that's my new pie in the sky sort of plan.
That sounds great. That sounds great. And I'm going to go way back. Should have interrupted you, but I'm not a good interrupter. I know there are people listening who are wondering what fact finding is, those who aren't in formal neuropsych training. So just tell us real quick, when you say fact finding, what's happening in these meetings?
Fact finding is you get almost no information and you have to figure out pretty much what is going on with a patient and what recommendations you are going to make. So it is sort of working a case in real time, and you only get information that you ask for. So if you don't ask about sleep, you don't get information about sleep, and you could miss something, and then your resulting diagnosis and recommendations could be off.
Sure.
So it's basically starting with nothing, starting with I have a case, and people have to ask, okay, can you tell me the demographics of the patient? You have to start really early, just knowing nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, I know you said it's not for everybody, but I love that approach. I love that approach
Me
because it
too.
really puts the onus. I think it builds interviewing skills. Obviously, like there's a big translation to, what questions do you ask, and ask good questions and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And in a group setting, you don't, at least mine, I don't force people to engage. So when I do fact finding, if you just want to watch and see how it works, then, students have come and done that. And to get that rhythm of, okay, here, we're going to ask about current symptoms. We're going to ask about sleep. We're going to ask about medical history, psychiatric history. So you really get that flow and hit the major points, and it does, I hope, build interviewing skills, but also your whole case conceptualization just gets faster the more that you do this. And yeah, I love it too. I often say I get more out of it than the people who attend, and I think that's true.
Well, yeah. There's good research behind that, right? Like the facilitation or the kind of teaching part of it is huge. Yeah. Well, this is great. I mean, this is it's such a big topic to tackle, and I hope that we've just been able to take a couple little steps here today, and get some folks interested and maybe motivated to dive deeper and explore some of the resources, pursue some of these strategies that you've talked about. I know you're very passionate in this area, and there's a lot that you have to offer, and many other people as well. But yeah, I hope it's just to spark some energy for folks around this.
So, and I'll be in touch so that you can present a case at fact finding.
Okay, I just got real nervous. I was pretty chill this whole podcast, Lynette, and now I just got a little nervous. Yeah. That'd be awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. It was really a privilege to be able to talk to you for a little while.
Well, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff, so I appreciate that you wanted to listen to it.
Anytime. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Always grateful to have you here. I hope that you take away some information that you can implement in your practice and in your life. Any resources that we mentioned during the episode will be listed in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. If you like what you hear on the podcast, I would be so grateful if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're a practice owner or aspiring practice owner, I'd invite you to check out the Testing Psychologist mastermind groups. I have mastermind groups at every stage of practice development, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. We have homework, we have accountability, we have support, we have resources. These groups are amazing. We do a lot of work and a lot of connecting. If that sounds interesting to you, you can check out the details at thetestingpsychologist.com/consulting. You can sign up for a pre-group phone call and we will chat and figure out if a group could be a good fit for you. Thanks so much. The information contained in this podcast and on the Testing Psychologist website are intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no doctor-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host or guests of this podcast and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of any mental health practitioner or medical provider, please seek one in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please find a supervisor with an expertise that fits your needs.